I think the average guy assumes that living in the Playboy Mansion would be a paradise. Massive parties with huge celebs, fast cars lining the driveway, and tons of ladies. Yes, living in the Playboy Mansion would be amazing if you're a guy. Probably not towards the end though, because you'd probably just end up playing bingo and watching Seinfeld reruns with Hugh Hefner. You know, he was 91 years old when he died. Anyway, but living there as a female was an entirely different dynamic. If you were a playmate, it was kind of weird. This is how it would work. If you wanted to get into the industry and you wanted to live there as a woman, then you had to start somewhere. And historically, you would be a cocktail waitress and you'd work at one of the many clubs that was underneath the Playboy empire. You'd be a cocktail waitress, you'd get the little rabbit ears, and you'd now be a Playboy bunny. And you would work and mingle and network and make tips. And through the nature of the industry, and the nature of the job, you would sometimes meet key people in the Playboy company. Executives, directors, photographers, and you would try and leverage this network to get closer to Hef. And eventually, if you got lucky, you'd be at the right club at the right time or the right party at the right time as a waitress, and you would get the chance to meet him. If he liked the way you looked, then you'd get a second chance and you'd be able to kind of talk to him and mingle and make a good first impression. Alongside this, you would model and you would be a aspiring actress or aspiring model who wants to be in Playboy. And if you did this enough times and you took care of yourself and whatever, then you would eventually be picked for Playmate of the Month. Now, this was a huge deal in this industry, especially back then in like the 60s, 70s, and 80s. This was enormous. You know why? Because Hef personally approved every single Playmate of the Month. This also guaranteed you a chance to meet Hef. And now it's up to you to get his pacemaker ticking. Now you're going to be mingling. Now you got to chat to him, make him laugh, make him feel all sensual-like. And then hopefully he will like the look of your jig and he will invite you to another party. And then another party after that. And he'll let you kind of slowly into his already huge group of girlfriends. And then he'll invite you back to his house where you can party there. And then he'll invite you back. And ideally, if you do fit the dynamic, then he'll send you a letter, a lovely little love letter that's like you're 7 years old. And it'll go, hello there, would you be my girlfriend? And if you accept, then you can move in with Hugh Hefner and officially be a playgirl. And being a playmate was fun. You got to party with Hef all the time. You got to meet all these crazy celebs, and he gave you $1,000 allowance every single week for doing nothing, and you can spend that on whatever you'd like. And the house itself was beautiful. I mean, really. It had 29 rooms. It had a beautiful pool. It had its own zoo. It was nice. It was cool to live there. So a lot of people wanted to do it. It was also really good for your career. But if you did live there, then there were some rules that you had to abide by. You weren't allowed to have any red lipstick. Hugh had a big issue with red lipstick. He thought that it made his models look a lot older. Historically, Holly Madison came down and she was wearing bright red lipstick the one day. And he freaked out in his old man way. He's like, you're not going to be wearing red lipstick. Makes you look old. Take it off. Every single night at 9 p.m., the gates would shut and nobody was allowed in past that point. Doesn't matter if you were with your friends or you had an emergency or you were with your family. If you were not inside of those gates by 9 p.m., he would not allow you back in. He never even explained why that was. He just stuck to it. You had to be quiet when Hef was speaking. If you were in a room with him and a bunch of other people, as soon as he started talking, everybody else had to shut up and look at him, which I think is kind of like his vision from the 1950s. It's super archaic. You were not allowed to have any boyfriends at all. If Hef even got the slightest whiff that you were cheating on him, boof, that's it, you're done. You'd be asked to leave immediately. Hef had a really particular look that he liked to stick by, and it was blondes. If you lived there, you had to have bleached blonde hair. It's just what he liked. You had to be super dressed up and look nice all the time. And this kind of created a bit of a jealousy dynamic in terms of the actual playmates. Everybody was vying for Hef's attention and trying to be close to him and wanting more of his attention than someone else. And with everybody kind of like dressing up all the time, it made for a really uncomfortable place to live in. If you moved in, you had to sign a really strict NDA, which is still evident now because a lot of the girls struggle to talk about what they saw at the house and who did what at the house. But this really plays into his most important rule, which was that if you were a playmate living in the main house, you were expected to have sex with him. So Holly Madison kind of spoke about what that was like in her book. And she says that they would go out to a club, they'd come back, people would be kind of intoxicated, and he would pop a couple of Viagras and he'd lay down on his bed because he's an old man at this point, and he'd have like 7 or 8 of his girlfriends ranging from 19 to 24, and then they would just one by one jump up on top of him and they do their thing for a minute each, and then he'd push him off and he'd move on to the next one, which I think is kind of gross. But eventually, this sort of stuff just stopped happening. People lost interest, and the Playboy empire itself fell to pieces very slowly. People stopped buying the magazine because the internet obviously caught up really quickly to what raunchy is and can be. And eventually, most of the girls ended up moving out, and Hugh Hefner spent the last few years of his life in his mansion, probably with like 1 or 2 girls living with him and just playing chess. There was this photo that was released a few months before Hugh Hefner died of him with the walking stick, and everybody was like, oh my gosh, heartbreaking photo of Hugh Hefner. Relax, man. Firstly, everyone gets old, and I think that he got old a lot nicer than most people will get old. I'm probably going to get old just living in an old age home, having some robot wipe my ass and change my nappy. This guy got old with 19-year-old supermodels jumping up on his floppy noodle, bro. I think he was fine. So what ended up happening to the actual Playboy Mansion? Well, it was sold in 2016 to a guy called Darren Metropolis. He's the son of a billionaire. He lived right next door to the Playboy Mansion. He had a good relationship with Hugh, and Hugh said to him, you can have it for $100 million, but just let me live here until the day that I die, which he obviously did, and Hugh died in 2017. Darren has now since taken the property, and he is renovating it. It's 7 years later, and the property is still under renovation. He's doing a bunch of different things to it. Apparently, he has this house now, the Playboy Mansion, and his actual house is right next to it, so he's going to build it out into some sort of like mega property. I'm so glad the guy looks like this. Could you imagine if he was a billionaire and handsome? I'd be pissed. The legacy of Playboy will always be super controversial because on one hand, you've got models who say that living there was a dream come true. It helped kickstart their career and set them up for a successful future of which they are still benefiting from today. And then on the other hand, you've got models who say that living there was a complete nightmare that made them doubt themselves and that made them develop severe depression. And you've got other accounts who say that it was a mix of the two. What do you think? Do you think that the legacy of Playboy should be celebrated, or do you think it is built on exploitation?